What if the fog could copy you? If time trapped you on an endless road? If you discovered you've been helping a ghost for years? I'm bringing you 10 deeply disturbing stories from Oregon's smallest towns, where reality bends in terrifying ways. Names and details have been changed for privacy, but every chilling moment you're about to hear actually happened to real people. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Don't forget to subscribe to Unspoken Fears for more true horror stories that will haunt your nights. My name is Analia, and I'm a wildlife photographer. I've traveled to some of the most remote places on Earth, captured grizzlies in Alaska, documented wolf packs in Montana, and spent weeks alone in wilderness that would terrify most people. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened in Bandon, Oregon. I'm telling you this because you need to know. If you ever visit that coastal town, if you ever see fog that moves wrong, get out. Don't wait. Don't try to understand it. Just run. It started as a dream assignment. A nature magazine hired me to photograph the tide pools at Bandon Beach during the spring low tides. The timing had to be perfect. Dawn light hitting the pools just right, capturing the starfish and anemones in their natural habitat. I rented a small beach house right on the coastline, close enough that I could hear the waves from my bedroom. The owner was an elderly man who barely made eye contact when he handed me the keys. He mumbled something about the rental terms, then paused at the door. "Stay inside if the fog talks," he said. I laughed, thinking it was some kind of local joke. "Talks?" He didn't smile. "You'll know what I mean. Just stay inside." The first morning, I woke at 5. The air was crisp, salty, perfect. I grabbed my equipment and headed down to the beach. That's when I saw it. The fog rolling in from the ocean, but it wasn't like any fog I'd ever seen. I've photographed in foggy conditions dozens of times. I know how marine layers behave, how they drift and dissipate. This was different. It moved in geometric patterns, swirling in perfect spirals, forming shapes that almost looked deliberate. The wind was blowing east, inland, but the fog was moving west, against it. But have you ever seen something so beautiful that you ignored every warning sign your body was giving you? I started shooting. The photos were incredible, the fog creating this ethereal backdrop for the exposed tide pools. I worked for 2 hours, and the fog never quite reached me. It stayed about 50 yards away, like there was an invisible barrier. When the sun finally broke through, the fog didn't gradually fade. It just stopped, retreating back to the ocean in minutes. Back at the house, I downloaded the photos. They were stunning, exactly what the magazine wanted. But as I scrolled through them, I noticed something in the background of one shot. A dark shape in the fog, humanoid but indistinct. Probably just a rock formation or a trick of the light. I edited it out and thought nothing more of it. The second morning, I woke to the sound of my own voice. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. Someone outside was calling my name. Analia. It sounded exactly like me, the same pitch, the same slight rasp I have in the mornings. "Analia, come see." I looked out the window. The fog had come inland, pressing against the glass, so thick I couldn't see 5 feet beyond the house. The voice came again, from somewhere in that white void. "Analia, the light is perfect." Something about hearing my own voice, saying words I hadn't spoken, made my skin crawl. I remembered the old man's warning, "Stay inside if the fog talks." This had to be what he meant. I stepped away from the window and waited. For 3 hours, I heard myself calling from the fog, sometimes close, sometimes distant. The words changed. "Come outside. Don't you want to see? The tide pools are beautiful right now." When the fog finally retreated, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Some acoustic trick, sound bouncing off the water, my own voice from the morning before somehow echoing back. I'm a rational person. I believe in science, in explanations, but my hands were shaking when I made coffee. I should have left then. I should have packed my equipment, driven back to Portland, and forgotten about Bandon. But I'm stubborn, and I'd been hired to do a job. I had one more morning of optimal tide conditions. Just one more. The third morning, I made a decision. I would go out, but I'd be quick. In and out, 30 minutes maximum. I dressed in my warmest layers, grabbed my camera, and headed to the beach. The fog was already there, waiting. It had formed a corridor leading from my door straight to the tide pools like a path. The borders of this path were sharp, unnaturally defined. Clear air in the center, walls of fog on either side. What would you do if something impossible offered you exactly what you wanted? I walked down the path. My footsteps were too loud in the silence. No waves, no birds, no wind. Just my breathing and the soft crunch of sand under my boots. I reached the tide pools and started shooting, working fast. The light was indeed perfect, golden, and soft. I was so focused on my work that I didn't notice at first. There was someone else in the fog. I saw her from the corner of my eye, a figure standing about 20 yards away, just barely visible through the white haze. She was moving, walking parallel to me. I adjusted my position to get a better angle on a particularly vibrant anemone, and she moved too. Same direction, same pace. I stopped. She stopped. My blood turned to ice. I turned to face her directly, and that's when I saw it clearly. The figure was me. Same height, same build, same coat. She was wearing my red jacket, the one I'd planned to wear tomorrow, the one that was currently hanging in the beach house closet. She mimicked my posture, tilted her head the same way I was tilting mine. But there was a delay. Just a fraction of a second, like she was receiving instructions and executing them a beat late. I raised my hand. She raised hers. I took a step back. She took a step back. Then I did something she wasn't expecting. I ran. Immediately, the fog closed in. The path disappeared. I was surrounded by white, couldn't see the ocean, couldn't see the house, couldn't see anything. Behind me, I heard footsteps, running. Fast, getting closer. I sprinted blindly, hoping I was heading toward the house, expecting to slam into rocks or plunge into water at any moment. The footsteps were right behind me now. I could hear breathing that matched my own panicked gasps. I didn't dare look back. My foot hit the porch step, and I nearly fell, caught myself, fumbled with the door. It was unlocked, thank God. I'd left it unlocked. I threw myself inside and slammed it shut. Through the window, I saw her, standing on the porch, inches from the glass, my own face looking back at me. But the expression was wrong, too curious, too empty. She raised her hand and pressed it against the window, fingers splayed. Then she smiled, and it wasn't my smile. It was something wearing my face, trying to remember how humans smile. The fog swirled around her for another hour before it retreated. She stood there the entire time, watching me. When the sun broke through and the fog pulled back to the ocean, she went with it, walking backward, maintaining eye contact until the white consumed her. I left Bandon that day, didn't pack properly, didn't clean the rental, just threw everything in my car and drove. I was 50 miles away before I remembered my camera. I'd left it on the beach. I wasn't going back for it. The magazine could bill me for the equipment. I didn't care. But 2 weeks later, a package arrived at my apartment. My camera, in perfect condition. No return address. I almost threw it away, but professional curiosity won. I checked the memory card. All my photos from that morning were there, including shots I didn't remember taking. There were dozens of photos of me sleeping in the beach house bed taken from outside the window. Photos of me in the shower, visible through the fogged glass. Photos of me sitting at the kitchen table, unaware. All taken over the 3 days I was there. The timestamps showed they were taken at night, while I slept. The last photo was a selfie, taken that third morning. In it, the figure was standing directly behind me, so close that her chin nearly rested on my shoulder. Her hand was reaching up, fingers almost touching my hair. The timestamp showed This was taken seconds before I ran. My name is Parker, and I'm 45 years old. When my marriage ended after 18 years, I thought inheriting my uncle's duplex in Joseph, Oregon was a sign. A fresh start in a quiet town, a chance to rebuild my life away from the mess I'd left behind in Portland. The building was old but solid, a 2-story house with my living space on top and a basement apartment below. My uncle had lived alone in the upper unit for decades. The basement had been empty for years, or so I thought. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things. The first week felt like healing. I spent my days unpacking boxes, painting walls, trying to make the place feel like mine instead of my uncle's. Joseph is the kind of town where people still wave at strangers, where the biggest excitement is the weekend farmer's market. Exactly what I needed. The house settled and creaked like old houses do, and I didn't think anything of it. Footsteps below me at night, old wooden floors expanding and contracting, the sound of water running through pipes. Probably the neighbors. I explained everything away because I wanted this to work so badly. But on the 8th day, I found my mail scattered across the backyard. Not just a few pieces. Dozens of envelopes, bills, magazines, everything that should have been in my mailbox for the past week. They were spread out deliberately, arranged in a spiral pattern on the dead grass. Some were opened. I stood there in my bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, staring at this impossible thing. The mailbox was locked. I had the only key. And yet, here was a week's worth of mail, read and discarded like trash. I gathered it all up, hands shaking slightly. Someone was messing with me. Maybe neighborhood kids. Maybe someone who didn't like outsiders moving into town. I told myself it was nothing, just a prank. But that night, lying in bed, I heard footsteps below me. Not the random creaks of an old house. Actual footsteps. Walking from what would be the basement kitchen to the bedroom area. A pattern, like someone pacing. I got up and stood on my floor listening. The footsteps stopped. I waited 5 minutes. Nothing. The moment I climbed back into bed, they started again. The next morning, I checked the basement door. It was locked, exactly as I'd left it. The windows were sealed shut, painted over years ago. There was no way in except through that door, and I had the only key. I unlocked it and peered down the dark stairwell. A smell drifted up. Coffee and something cooking, maybe eggs. My stomach dropped. I slammed the door and locked it. Someone was living in my basement. Have you ever been so certain of something impossible that your mind starts creating explanations, each more desperate than the last? I called the police. They came, 2 officers who looked barely old enough to drive. We went down together, flashlights cutting through the darkness. I hit the light switch. Nothing happened. Bulb must be out. We searched every room of the basement apartment. Empty. Completely empty. Dust on every surface, cobwebs in the corners. No signs of life at all. The officers were polite, but clearly thought I was wasting their time. Stressed from the divorce, they said. New place, unfamiliar sounds. Happens all the time. But I knew what I'd smelled. Coffee, eggs, someone cooking breakfast. After they left, I stood in my kitchen and realized something. I'd bought groceries 3 days ago. Milk, eggs, bread, lunch meat, the basics. I opened the refrigerator. The milk was gone. Half the eggs were missing. The bread had 2 slices left. I lived alone. I'd made 1 sandwich and had cereal twice. Someone was eating my food. I started keeping inventory. I wrote down everything in my fridge, counted every item. Each morning, something was gone. Not a lot. Just enough that I might not notice if I wasn't paying attention. 3 eggs, 4 slices of bread, enough milk for a bowl of cereal. Whoever was down there was rationing my groceries, taking just enough to survive. The footsteps continued every night. Always the same pattern. Kitchen to bedroom, bedroom to bathroom, bathroom back to kitchen. Like someone following a routine, living their life in the space below mine. I pressed my ear to the floor and heard water running. Heard what sounded like a television, though there was no TV down there. Heard humming, a woman's voice, tuneless and sad. On the 14th day, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a crowbar and went down to the basement. The door was locked from my side, but I didn't trust it anymore. I checked every corner again with a flashlight. Empty. Dusty. Abandoned. But then I noticed something I'd missed before. The dust on the floor wasn't uniform. There were paths through it. Foot-shaped areas where the dust had been disturbed. Recently. I put my hand on the kitchen counter. It was warm. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window, and for just a moment, I thought I saw someone standing behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Just shadows and empty rooms. But the air felt occupied, like the space was holding its breath, waiting for me to leave. I set up a camera that night. One of those motion-activated security cameras pointed at the basement stairs. If someone was getting in, I'd have proof. I sat at my laptop and watched the live feed. The empty stairwell, the locked door, nothing moving. I watched for 3 hours straight. My eyes burned. I made coffee, looked away for maybe 30 seconds, and when I looked back at the screen, the basement door was open. Not opening, already open, like it had been open the whole time. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and ran downstairs. The door was closed and locked. I checked the camera footage, rewound it. There. One frame showed the door closed. The next frame showed it open. The frame after that showed it closed again. No transition, no movement, just 3 different states of reality captured 1 second apart. But what happened next made me forget about the door entirely. I watched the footage continue, nothing for an hour. Then, at frame 10:847, a coffee mug appeared on the basement kitchen counter. Not someone carrying it in, not being set down. 1 frame, no mug. Next frame, mug present, steam rising from it. I watched this impossible appearance over and over until the sun came up. Can technology capture ghosts, or does it just show us how little we understand about the world? I spent the next week documenting everything. More items appeared and disappeared on camera. A book on the basement couch, present for dozens of frames, then gone. A jacket hanging on a hook that wasn't there an hour before. Dishes in the sink that materialized between frames. And once, just once, I saw a shadow pass through the camera's view that didn't correspond to anything physical. My groceries kept disappearing. I stopped replacing them. If someone, or something, was living down there, maybe starving it out would make it leave. But on the 3rd day of buying no groceries, I found a note on my kitchen counter, written in shaky handwriting on the back of one of my old receipts. Please, I'm so hungry. I bought groceries that afternoon, put them away with trembling hands. Whatever was happening, I couldn't let something starve, even if I didn't understand what it was. That night, I did something stupid. I went down to the basement, and I spoke to the empty room. I know you're here, I said to the darkness. I don't understand how, but I know you're here. Who are you? Silence. Then, so faint I almost missed it, a woman's voice. I live here. What's your name? My voice cracked. Mary Ann. I've always lived here. This is my home. I ran upstairs and started searching through my uncle's papers. Birth certificates, tax records, property deeds. And then I found it. A death certificate, folded and hidden in an old book. Mary Ann Hutchins died at age 73 14 years ago. Place of death, 447, North Main Street, Joseph, Oregon. This address, cause of death, natural causes, discovered in basement apartment. The estate sale documents were paper-clipped to the death certificate. They'd sold everything in the house. Furniture, dishes, clothes, everything. The sale happened 3 days after she died, but reading the coroner's report, I saw something that made my blood freeze. She'd been dead for at least 2 weeks before anyone found her. Alone in the basement, no family, no one checking on her. She died, and the world moved on without noticing. I looked at the camera feed on my laptop. In the basement, a coffee mug sat on the counter, steam rising from fresh coffee. The book was back on the couch. The jacket hung on its hook. Marianne was still living her life in that basement apartment, following the same routine she'd followed for decades. She died down there, but she never left. And when they sold all her belongings around her, cleaning out the space she still occupied, she just kept existing in the gaps between moments, taking what she needed to survive from the only person who could provide it, whoever lived upstairs. The groceries still disappear. The footsteps still echo below me at night. Sometimes I hear her humming, that same sad, tuneless melody. I leave the basement door unlocked now. I buy extra food and pretend not to notice when it vanishes. Because Marianne died alone, forgotten, and the least I can do is let her keep living in the only home she ever knew. My name is Kira, and I've been a postal delivery driver for 11 years. I've driven through blizzards, floods, and roads that barely deserve the name. I've seen plenty of strange things in rural Oregon, abandoned towns, weather that changes in seconds, wildlife where it shouldn't be. But I'd never experienced anything like what happened on Route 19 outside Fossil. I'm telling you this because I need someone to understand. I need someone to believe me. Because what happened that day wasn't just strange. It was impossible. It started ordinarily enough. My coworker called in sick, some stomach bug that had been going around. The supervisor asked if I could cover his route just for the day. Route 19, Fossil area, mostly farmhouses and ranches spread across empty country. I'd never driven it before, but I had the manifest and a GPS. Easy money, I thought. Overtime pay for driving through some beautiful high desert landscape. I loaded up the truck at 6 in the morning and headed out. The first part of the route went fine. Small post office in Fossil, then out into the sprawl of scattered addresses. Mailbox after mailbox, each one miles from the last. The kind of route where you see more cattle than people. By 10 o'clock, I was making good time, almost enjoying the solitude. Then I turned onto County Road 19B. The road was straight, cutting through sagebrush and juniper trees, with hills rising in the distance. Nothing remarkable about it. I had 12 mailboxes to hit along this stretch. Then I'd loop back to the main highway. The first mailbox was easy to spot. Red flag, mounted on a post made from an old wagon wheel. Cute. I made the delivery and continued. The second mailbox was identical. Red flag, wagon wheel post. I slowed down, confused. Maybe the same family owned multiple properties. But the address was different, and the landscape looked exactly the same. Same cluster of juniper trees on the left, same hill formation on the right, same everything. I checked my manifest. Different address, different name. I made the delivery and drove on, a weird feeling settling in my stomach. Third mailbox, red flag, wagon wheel post, identical juniper trees, identical hills. I stopped the truck and got out. The air was still, no wind at all, which was unusual for this exposed area. I walked back 20 yards and stared at the mailbox. Then I walked forward to the next one. They were the same, not similar, identical. Same rust patterns on the metal flag, same crack in the wagon wheel wood, same faded paint job. I got back in the truck and checked my GPS. It showed I was progressing along the route, moving forward. The little blue dot advanced down the red line, marking my path. But when I looked up, the landscape was repeating. Could you trust your own eyes if technology told you something different? I kept driving. Fourth mailbox, fifth, sixth, all identical, same everything. I glanced at my clock, 10:47 a.m. I drove for what felt like another 20 minutes. Checked the clock again, 10:47 a.m. Not moving. I tapped it. Nothing wrong with the display. My phone showed the same time, 10:47 a.m. Panic started creeping in. I turned the truck around, deciding to head back the way I came. I drove for 10 minutes, watching for the point where I turned onto this road. But instead of reaching the intersection, I arrived at that first red flag mailbox again, the one that had started this loop, except now I was approaching it from the opposite direction as if I'd driven in a complete circle despite the road being straight. I stopped and sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel. This wasn't possible. Roads don't loop back on themselves when they're straight. Time doesn't freeze. I was exhausted, that was all. Tired from getting up early, stressed about covering an unfamiliar route. I'd rest for 5 minutes, clear my head, and everything would make sense. But when I started driving again, nothing changed. Same mailboxes, same landscape, same frozen time. I was stuck in some kind of loop, and I had no idea how to get out. On what I counted as my 7th pass, though I'd lost track of whether I was even counting correctly, I saw another vehicle, a white pickup truck coming toward me from the opposite direction. Relief flooded through me. Someone else, someone who could help, or at least confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. I slowed down, rolling down my window to wave at the driver. As we got closer, I saw him clearly through his windshield. A man, maybe 60 years old, with gray hair and a flannel shirt. But his face, his expression, pure terror. Eyes wide, mouth open like he was screaming. His hands gripped his steering wheel the same way mine gripped mine. I waved frantically. He didn't respond, didn't even seem to see me. His truck passed mine, and I watched in my mirror as it continued down the road. I turned around again, my dozenth turnaround by now, and tried to catch up with him. But his truck was gone, just vanished, and I was back at the mailbox with the red flag. How long can a human mind hold onto reality when reality stops making sense? I pulled out my delivery manifest to ground myself in something concrete. As I scanned the list, I noticed check marks next to addresses I didn't remember delivering to, my handwriting, my initials, but no memory of making those stops. According to my log, I'd completed 17 deliveries along this stretch, but I'd only consciously made 3. The GPS showed I'd traveled 47 miles since turning onto this road. Impossible. The entire stretch was supposed to be 12 miles total. Yet my odometer confirmed it. The numbers kept climbing even though I was seeing the same landmarks over and over. I tried turning off the engine. Maybe if I broke the pattern, stopped moving, something would reset. I sat in silence for what my phone claimed was 30 minutes, though it felt like hours. When I started the truck again and began driving, the loop continued. Same mailboxes, same frozen clock showing 10:47 a.m., same suffocating sense of being trapped in a space that shouldn't exist. My gas gauge hadn't moved since I entered this stretch, still showing 3/4 full, exactly where it had been when I started. I should have burned through at least half a tank by now with all this driving. But the needle stayed frozen, just like the clock, just like time itself seemed frozen in this impossible place. I started talking to myself, just to hear a voice. Okay, Kira, think. There has to be a logical explanation. Roads don't repeat. Time doesn't stop. You're missing something obvious. But no matter how many times I said it, nothing changed. The sun moved, though. That was the only thing that seemed to progress normally. I watched it arc across the sky, shadows growing longer, the quality of light shifting from morning to afternoon to something approaching evening. The clock still said 10:47 a.m., but the sun was setting. On what might have been my 20th loop or my 50th, I'd completely lost count. I noticed something different. The light had turned golden, that specific color that only happens right before sunset. And in that light, I saw a shimmer ahead on the road, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt, except the day wasn't hot. I drove toward it, holding my breath. The shimmer grew larger, filling my whole windshield. And then I was through it. The landscape changed, different hills, different vegetation, a curve in the road that hadn't been there before. My clock suddenly jumped. 10:47 became 6:23 p.m. 8 hours had passed in an instant. My GPS chimed, announcing I'd reached the end of the route segment. I pulled over, shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel. I checked my odometer. It showed I'd driven 340 miles since leaving Fossil that morning. The GPS log showed only 47 miles for this route section. Both numbers were real, both displayed on working devices, both completely contradicting each other. I finished the route in a daze, delivered the remaining mail, and drove back to the depot. My supervisor asked why I was so late. I told him I'd had truck trouble, needed to stop and check the engine. I didn't mention the loop, didn't mention the frozen time or the impossible miles or the terrified driver in the white pickup. Who would believe me? But 3 weeks later, I saw a news article. Search crews had found an abandoned white pickup truck on a remote forest road near Fossil. The driver, a local rancher, had been missing for 2 months. They found his truck with the engine still running, gas tank full, keys in the ignition. The odometer showed he'd driven over 800 miles. The vehicle had been reported missing just 12 miles from his ranch. Inside the truck, they found a journal. The last entry, written in increasingly erratic handwriting, described driving the same stretch of road over and over, unable to escape, watching the same mailbox appear, again and again. The entry ended mid-sentence. I see another truck coming. Maybe they can help. Maybe they can... I never took another route near Fossil. I requested permanent reassignment, took a pay cut to stay on familiar roads, because now I know that some places don't follow the rules. Some stretches of road exist outside normal time and space, and if you're unlucky enough to drive onto them, you might loop forever. That rancher never made it out. I did, somehow, but I still don't understand why the road released me when it kept him, and I never want to find out. My name is Aiden, and I've been a pharmacist for 28 years. I run the only pharmacy in Morrow, Oregon, a town small enough that I know most of my customers by name, remember their allergies, can recite their medication histories from memory. I take pride in that personal touch, that level of care you don't get at chain pharmacies in bigger cities. I've always believed that attention to detail saves lives. But there are some details the human mind isn't meant to process, some prescriptions that shouldn't exist, and some patients who defy every law of biology I thought I understood. It started on a Tuesday morning in March. I was restocking the blood pressure medications when the fax machine beeped. A new prescription coming through from a doctor I didn't recognize. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes people moved to the area, brought prescriptions from their previous physicians. I walked over and watched the paper feed through. The prescription was strange from the first glance. The compound listed was something I'd never encountered. Temprazine 7, 250 milliliters, take 1 tablet daily with food. The prescribing physician's name was listed as Dr. Chen, with a medical license number and DEA number that looked legitimate in format. But the medication name didn't match anything in my database. Not in the PDR, not in any pharmaceutical reference I had access to. Not even in the experimental drug registries I could search. I called the phone number listed for the prescribing physician. Disconnected. Tried the DEA number verification system. No record found. This should have been the moment I refused to fill it. Standard protocol. But then the customer walked in. He looked to be in his mid-30s, average height, brown hair, brown eyes, unremarkable in every way. He approached the counter with a nervous smile. "Hi, I called earlier about a prescription transfer. Should be coming through any minute." "Just received it," I said. "But I'm having trouble verifying some of the information. This medication, Temprazine 7, I'm not familiar with it. What's it prescribed for?" He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "It's for a rare metabolic condition. My previous pharmacist had to special order it. I know it's unusual, but my doctor assured me any licensed pharmacist could fill it. The compound information should be on the second page." There was no second page, but as I looked down at the prescription again, suddenly there was. A full page of chemical formulas, preparation instructions, compounding ratios. Had I missed it the first time? The detail was extraordinary. Molecular structures, binding agents, specific temperature requirements for mixing. It looked legitimate, professional, exactly the kind of technical documentation that would accompany a specialized compound. What made me proceed when every instinct said to stop? I'm a professional. I've compounded custom medications hundreds of times. The formula, while unusual, didn't contain any controlled substances or obviously dangerous combinations. And the man standing in front of me looked genuinely worried, like someone who needed medication to maintain his health. I made a judgment call. It'll take me about an hour to compound this, I said. You can wait or come back. I'll wait. Thank you so much. You have no idea how hard it's been to find someone willing to fill this. I should have asked him what he meant by that. Instead, I went to work. The compounding process was complex, requiring precise measurements and careful mixing. The ingredients themselves were common enough. Various stabilizers, binding agents, a base compound I recognized as similar to certain enzyme inhibitors. Nothing that raised red flags individually, but combined according to these instructions, they created something I'd never seen before. The final product had an odd quality to it, a slight iridescence that shifted colors depending on the angle. I bottled it, labeled it, brought it to the counter. The customer paid in cash, thanked me profusely, and left. I filed the prescription, entered it into my system, and thought nothing more of it. 3 days later, he came back. I was working the register when he walked in, and I almost didn't recognize him. He looked old. Not mid-30s anymore, more like mid-50s, maybe even 60. Deep lines carved into his face, gray threading through his hair, the kind of aged appearance that comes from decades of hard living. His posture was different too, slightly stooped, movements slower. Can I help you? I asked, uncertain. Just need to pick up my prescription refill, he said. His voice was raspier than I remembered, like a smoker's voice, though I hadn't smelled cigarettes on him during the first visit. I'm sorry, what's the name? He gave me the same name from the original prescription. I pulled up his file. It showed his birth date as making him 36 years old, but the man in front of me looked twice that age. Are you feeling all right? I asked. You look. Have you been ill? He frowned. I feel fine. Why? No reason. It's just... Never mind. You're not due for a refill yet. You should have 28 days of medication remaining. Oh. He looked confused. I guess I miscounted. Sorry to bother you. He left, and I stood there, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. People don't age 20 years in 3 days. It wasn't possible. Maybe he'd been using drugs, or he was sick and hadn't told me, or I'd simply misremembered what he looked like the first time. The mind plays tricks. Memory is fallible. But I pulled up the security footage from his first visit and compared it to the footage from today. The difference was undeniable. Same person, vastly different age. I watched the first video 3 times, then the second video 3 times. No mistake. No trick of lighting or angle. He'd aged decades in 72 hours. 4 days after that second visit, he came in again. This time, he looked young. Not mid-30s, like the first visit, but genuinely young. Early 20s, maybe even late teens. Smooth skin, bright eyes, no gray in his hair at all. He walked with the easy energy of someone who'd never experienced a backache or stiff joints. He approached the counter and smiled at me. Hi, do you guys carry vitamin D supplements? Aisle 3, I said automatically. Then, wait, don't you have a prescription here? He looked puzzled. A prescription? I've never been here before, just passing through town. When does the evidence become so overwhelming that denial becomes impossible? You were here last week, I insisted. You picked up a compounded medication, Temperzine 7. I think you have me confused with someone else. He shrugged and walked to aisle 3. I pulled up the customer database and searched for his name. Nothing. No record. I checked the prescription files, both digital and paper. The original prescription I'd filed was gone. I searched the compounding logs, where I meticulously recorded every custom medication I prepared. No entry for Temperzine 7. It was like the entire transaction had been erased, but I remembered it. I remembered the chemical formulas, the hour I'd spent carefully measuring and mixing, the strange iridescence of the final product. I remembered his face, his voice, the cash payment. You can't erase memory. I went back to the security footage, found the date of his first visit, watched myself at the counter, going through the motions of talking to someone, but the frame where the customer should be standing was empty. I was interacting with air, handing a medication bottle to no one, taking cash from no one's hand. Except the cash register showed a transaction, the exact amount, payment received for one compounded prescription. I fast-forwarded to the second visit. Again, footage showed me talking to empty space, but this time, as I watched frame by frame, I saw something. A flicker, a shadow. In frame 10 and 47, for just one frame, a face appeared. Elderly, lined, exactly as I remembered from that second visit. Then gone in the next frame. I checked today's footage. The young man was there, solid and real, browsing the vitamin aisle. But when I rewound to his arrival, he walked through the front door in the normal way, except for 3 frames where he appeared middle-aged, then elderly, then young again, cycling through ages as he crossed the threshold. I stayed late that night, watching hours of footage, taking notes like a scientist documenting an impossible experiment. The pattern became clear. Every time this person appeared, he was a different age. Sometimes the changes happened between visits. Sometimes they happened between frames of video. He was aging and de-aging in ways that violated every biological law I knew. The medication. It had to be related to the medication. I went back through my compounding records one more time, searching for any backup files, any trace of that prescription, and I found something I'd missed before. A digital timestamp in my system showing a prescription filled, but when I clicked on it, the file was corrupted. All I could read was the customer's birth date. According to this, he would be born on November 3rd, 2028, 3 years from now. How do you compound medication for someone who doesn't exist yet? How do you interact with a person who won't be born for years? The timestamp on that first prescription showed I'd filled it last week. But if his birth date was accurate, that meant what? That time wasn't linear for him? That he was somehow moving backwards and forwards through his own existence, aging and de-aging, appearing at different points in his timeline. The next morning, a new prescription came through the fax. Same format, same medication, same prescribing physician that didn't exist. But this time, the patient name was different, and the birth date showed someone who should have died 40 years ago. I didn't fill it. I took the fax, locked it in my desk drawer, and closed the pharmacy early, because I finally understood what I'd done. That first prescription, that compound I'd so carefully prepared. I'd created something that existed outside normal time. And by filling it, I'd marked myself, made myself visible to people who moved through time differently than the rest of us. They keep coming now. Different names, different ages that don't match their appearances, birth dates that make no sense. Yesterday, a woman who looked 70 asked for a medication. Her ID showed she was 19. This morning, a child no older than 10 presented a prescription with a birth date that put him at 45 years old. I fill the prescriptions now. What choice do I have? Because I learned something else from the security footage. In the background of every video, in the reflection of the pharmacy window, I can see myself. And I'm changing too. Some frames show me younger, some older. My own timeline is breaking down, unstable, flickering through ages I've already lived and ages I haven't reached yet. The medication I compounded that first day is still in my system somehow, even though I never took it. Maybe I inhaled particles while mixing it. Maybe touching it was enough. Or maybe just knowing how to create it was the contamination. The information itself acting like a virus that rewrites your relationship with time. I look in the mirror now, and I never know what age I'll see staring back. Sometimes I'm 25 again, all my current memories trapped in a younger body. Sometimes I'm 80, feeling aches and pains from a future I haven't lived yet. And sometimes, just for a moment, I see myself at an age that humans shouldn't reach. Ancient, withered, something that should be dead but isn't. The prescription refill requests keep coming, and I keep filling them. Because everyone in those prescriptions is like me now. We're all unstuck, all moving through our own timelines in broken, non-linear ways. And the only thing that seems to stabilize it, even temporarily, is that impossible medication I created. Temperzine 7, time in a bottle, the drug that shouldn't exist, prescribed by doctors who practice medicine across decades simultaneously, taken by patients who are living their entire lives at once. My name is Bethany, and I'm 23 years old. I was the night manager at Yoncalla Hardware, a position I'd held for 8 months before that night, before everything broke. I'm trying to tell this story the way it happened, but my memory fragments in places, skips like a scratched recording. The doctors say it's trauma, that my brain is protecting itself from something it can't process. But I remember enough. I remember the customers who shouldn't have been there. I remember helping them find items that don't exist anymore. And I remember where they found me in the morning, in a place I should never have been able to reach. Overnight inventory was routine. I'd done it 6 times before, always on the first Tuesday of the month. Lock the doors at 9, count every item in the store, reconcile the numbers with the computer system, finish by dawn. The owner trusted me completely. I was efficient, detail-oriented, never made mistakes. I actually enjoyed the solitude, the quiet rhythm of walking through aisles with my clipboard, the satisfaction of organizing numbers into neat columns. That Tuesday started like all the others. I locked the front doors, checked the back entrance, armed the security system on a bypass that let me move freely inside while keeping the perimeter secured. The store was mine for the next 9 hours. I made coffee in the break room, put on my playlist, and started in aisle 1, fasteners and small hardware. I was on aisle 3 counting packages of wood screws when I heard the front door chime. I looked up. A man stood near the paint section, maybe 60 years old, wearing clothes that seemed slightly outdated. Not costume level wrong, just off. His jacket had a cut that reminded me of pictures from my parents' old photo albums. "I'm sorry, we're closed," I called out. "I must not have locked the door properly." He smiled and walked toward me. "No problem. I just need to find some kerosene lamp wicks. My wife sent me out, says we're running low." Kerosene lamp wicks? I frowned. "I don't think we carry those anymore. Maybe try aisle 7, camping supplies." "Oh no, you definitely have them. Used to be in aisle 12, back section. Has that changed?" We didn't have an aisle 12. The store only went up to aisle 10. But something in his certainty made me doubt myself. Had I miscounted the aisles? I'd worked here 8 months. I should know the layout perfectly. "Let me check the computer," I said, walking to the nearest terminal. But when I tried to search for kerosene lamp wicks, the system showed no results. "I'm sorry, we don't stock those. Maybe we could order them." When I looked up, he was gone, just vanished. I walked quickly to where he'd been standing, empty. I checked the front door, still locked, deadbolt engaged. My coffee went cold in my hand. I told myself I'd imagined it. Exhaustion, maybe, or I'd been so focused on counting that my mind had conjured a customer from habit. I went back to my inventory, determined to focus. 20 minutes later, a woman asked me where to find the horse tack. She appeared at the end of aisle 5, no sound of approach, just suddenly there, middle-aged, wearing a floral dress that looked handmade. "Excuse me, dear. Could you point me toward the horse tack? My daughter's bridle needs replacing." Is it possible to know something is wrong while simultaneously accepting it as normal? "Horse tack," I repeated. "This is a hardware store. We don't carry equestrian supplies." She laughed, a pleasant sound. Of course you do. You've always carried it. Back corner, past the feed section. We didn't have a feed section. Never had, as far as I knew, but she seemed so confident that I found myself nodding. Let me show you, I heard myself say, and I started walking toward the back of the store. As we walked, I noticed things about her that didn't quite fit. Her dress, definitely handmade, with a style that was decades out of date. Her shoes, practical lace-ups that I'd only seen in historical photos. The way she carried herself, her speech patterns, everything slightly displaced in time. We reached the back corner, and she stopped at a wall, just a plain wall with paint chips displayed on it. Here we are, she said cheerfully. Oh, you've rearranged. The bridles used to be on the left. She reached forward and seemed to take something from the wall. I could see her hands closing around invisible objects, lifting them, examining them. This one will do perfectly. Where do I pay? The registers are at the front, I said weakly. She walked past me, heading toward the front of the store, still carrying her invisible purchase. I followed, but when I rounded the corner of aisle 9, she was gone. The front door remained locked. I checked my watch. 11:47 p.m. I'd been in the store for less than 3 hours, but it felt longer. My inventory sheets showed I'd counted through aisle 6, but I had no memory of doing aisles 4 through 6. The numbers were there in my handwriting, neat columns marking quantities and SKUs, but writing them was blank in my mind. More customers came after that. I stopped questioning how they got in. An elderly man looking for straight razors and shaving soap, products we'd never stocked. A young couple asking about radio tubes. A teenage boy who wanted ammunition for a rifle model I'd never heard of. Each one appeared without warning, asked for items that didn't exist, and vanished before completing their transactions. The terrible thing was how natural it felt. I helped each customer with the same polite efficiency I'd use during regular business hours. Showed them through the store, offered alternatives when their requested items couldn't be found, made recommendations. Part of my brain understood this was impossible, but a larger part had slipped into automatic customer service mode, going through familiar motions. Around 2 a.m., I realized none of them had used the door. They simply materialized, already inside, already mid-conversation. And they never cast quite the right shadows. Under the fluorescent lights, their shadows were too faint, or angled wrong, or sometimes missing entirely. I went to the security office and pulled up the camera feeds. On the monitors, I watched myself walking through the store alone, talking to empty space, gesturing to invisible people, reaching out to hand items to no one. In one frame, I stood in aisle 7, clearly in conversation, my head turning to follow someone who wasn't there. My lips moved, responding to questions I couldn't hear through the silent footage. The sight of myself, alone but behaving as if surrounded by people, should have terrified me into leaving. Instead, I felt a strange detachment, like I was watching someone else's breakdown. I returned to my inventory, and the customers kept coming. A woman needed door hinges, the old brass kind. A man searched for collar studs. Another woman asked about button hooks, each request more anachronistic than the last. I walked them through the store, showing them sections that seemed to appear as we approached them. Aisles I didn't recognize opened up ahead of me. Products I'd never seen lined shelves that shouldn't exist. At one point, I found myself in aisle 12, the one that didn't exist. The shelves were stocked with antiques, oil lamps, hand tools, with wooden handles worn smooth by decades of use, glass bottles with faded labels, metal tins advertising products from long-defunct companies. Everything covered in a thin layer of dust that puffed up when I touched it. "This is a good store," said a man beside me. I hadn't heard him approach. He wore overalls and a cap, his hands permanently stained with something dark. "Shame about what happened." "What happened?" I asked. "The accident. Back in 91. Man died right here, crushed when the shelving collapsed. They walled this section off after that. Didn't want customers getting hurt. But the merchandise is still here, just on the other side of the wall now. 34 years ago, before I was born. That's awful, I managed to say. He still works here, you know. Never left. Loyal employee, even in death. You've probably seen him around. When reality becomes fluid, do the dead notice they've died? I looked at the man more carefully. The dark stains on his hands, the way his body seemed compressed slightly, shoulders not quite level, the odd angle of his neck. Are you? I should get back to work, he said, and walked away into the shadows between shelves. I don't remember much after that. Fragments only. Ringing up purchases on a register that showed prices in amounts too low for modern currency. Helping a woman load packages into a car I could see through the window, a car from the 1960s, pristine and solid, parked in a lot I knew was empty. Writing inventory numbers for products that couldn't possibly be there. Kerosene lamps, horse tack, radio tubes, straight razors. My clipboard, filled with item names and quantities that made no sense. My pen moved automatically, recording stock from aisles that had been demolished decades ago, products the store had stopped carrying before I was born. I walked through spaces that existed in the past, served customers who'd been dead for years, did my job with mechanical efficiency even as reality unraveled around me. The morning shift found me in the walled-off section behind aisle 10, the section that had been sealed after the shelving accident in 1991. They had to break through drywall to reach me. I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by old merchandise that shouldn't have been there. The store had been cleared out after the accident, everything discarded or donated. But there I was, clipboard in hand, inventory sheets completely filled out. I couldn't speak for 3 days. Couldn't explain how I'd gotten through a solid wall, or why my inventory sheets listed hundreds of items the store hadn't stocked in decades. The security footage showed me working normally until around 2 a.m., then I simply vanished from the cameras. For the next 4 hours, the store appeared empty. At 6 a.m., I reappeared, walking out of a solid wall, clipboard in hand, looking confused. The doctors diagnosed severe dissociation, possible psychotic break from stress. They kept me for observation, gave me medications, taught me grounding techniques, but they couldn't explain the inventory sheets, couldn't explain how I'd gotten into that sealed section, or why the wall showed no signs of being breached before the morning shift broke through to reach me. I quit the job. Obviously, can't work retail when you can't trust that the customers are real. Can't do inventory when the store keeps revealing aisles that shouldn't exist. The owner was understanding, said I'd been working too hard, offered me a good reference. But sometimes, late at night, I'll see someone on the street wearing clothes just slightly out of time, and I'll wonder if they're looking for something. A store that exists in the wrong decade. A helpful employee who'll walk them through aisles that vanished years ago. Someone who can see them, help them, ring up their purchases even though they died before I was born. The inventory sheets are still in my apartment. I kept them, evidence of something I can't explain. Line after line of products from the past, quantities and SKUs, all in my handwriting. And at the bottom of the last page, a note I don't remember writing. Thank you for your help tonight. We appreciate your service. You're a good employee. We hope you'll stay. My name is Devin, and I'm 31 years old. 3 months ago, I walked away from my software development job in Seattle, burned out and exhausted from years of 70-hour weeks and impossible deadlines. I took what I told everyone was a sabbatical, but what really felt like saving my own life. I drove to Eastern Oregon with a tent, a backpack, and a plan to spend the summer hiking every trail in the Blue Mountains. I wanted solitude, nature, space to remember who I was before I became someone who dreamed in code. I found solitude, all right, more than I bargained for, because sometimes, when you're alone in the wilderness, you meet someone who shouldn't exist, and sometimes they don't want to let you leave. The trail to Fraser Lake started at a gravel parking area outside Ukiah, winding 12 miles through pine forest and alpine meadows. I'd planned it as a 2-day trip. Hike in, camp at the lake, hike out. The weather forecast was perfect, mid-70s and clear skies. I set out at dawn, pack loaded with camping gear, feeling more optimistic than I had in months. The city stress was finally leaving my body. My mind was clearing. This was exactly what I needed. 3 miles in, I met him on the trail. He was sitting on a fallen log, adjusting his bootlaces. Mid-30s, athletic build, expensive hiking gear that looked well-used rather than brand new. He looked up as I approached and smiled. "Beautiful morning for it." "Absolutely," I agreed, slowing down. "Heading to Fraser Lake." "That's the plan. You?" "Same. First time on this trail." "Third for me," he said, standing. "Mind if I join you? Always nicer to hike with company, and solo hiking makes my wife nervous." I hesitated for maybe half a second. I'd come out here for solitude, but the truth was, I'd been alone for weeks and was starting to crave human conversation. Sure, why not? His name was, well, he told me his name, and we talked for hours. But when I try to remember it now, my mind goes blank. That should have been my first warning, but I didn't notice at the time. The conversation was too engaging, too easy. We fell into step together, and it felt like hiking with an old friend. We talked about everything. He was a graphic designer, also feeling burned out, also taking time to rediscover himself in nature. We'd both worked in tech. Both felt the same soul-crushing pressure of the industry. He recommended books I'd been meaning to read, mentioned movies I loved, shared stories about his childhood that resonated with my own experiences. Every topic connected, every opinion aligned. It was the kind of instant rapport that happens maybe once or twice in a lifetime. Around noon, we stopped for lunch at a viewpoint overlooking a valley. I pulled out trail mix and an energy bar. He produced similar snacks from his pack. We ate and talked more, laughing about ridiculous project managers and impossible clients. I felt more relaxed than I had in years. "We should get a photo," I said, pulling out my phone. "Commemorate the perfect hiking day." "Absolutely." He moved closer, and I held my phone out for a selfie. We both smiled. I took 3 shots, checking to make sure at least one was in focus. When I looked at the screen, only I was in the frame. 3 photos, 3 different angles, all showing me alone at the viewpoint. My hiking partner should have been right there, half his face in the frame, arm probably visible where he'd been standing next to me. But the photo showed empty space beside me. Just me, awkwardly angled for a selfie with nobody there, smiling at nothing. I stared at the screen, my smile frozen. My hands went cold. "How'd they turn out?" he asked, leaning over to look. Could someone fail to see their own absence from a photograph? Little blurry," I lied, closing my phone quickly. "We can try again later." "Sure, no problem." He didn't react to the fact that he wasn't in the photos. Didn't question it, didn't seem to notice. He just kept eating his trail mix, kept talking about a documentary he'd watched about ultralight backpacking. His voice was normal, solid, real. I could see him clearly. Solid flesh, casting shadows, disturbing the air when he moved. But my camera said he wasn't there. I made myself keep hiking, keep talking, keep pretending everything was fine. But my mind was racing. I tried to come up with logical explanations. A glitch in my phone's camera software, some kind of weird lighting issue. But I'd taken hundreds of selfies with this phone. It worked fine, and there was no lighting condition that could make a person completely invisible in a photo while leaving everything else normal. I snuck another photo an hour later, pretending to take a landscape shot but angling it to catch both of us. Same result. I was there. He wasn't. Just empty trail beside me. My hiking partner, I still can't remember his name, and that's starting to scare me more than anything else, kept up the cheerful conversation. He didn't notice my growing panic, or if he did, he didn't mention it. We talked about upcoming trail sections, debated the best camping spots, shared stories about close encounters with wildlife. His stories. I remember them being engaging, detailed, specific. But now when I try to recall what he actually said, it's like grasping at smoke. The feeling of the conversations remains pleasant, engaging, friendly, but the content has evaporated. We reached Fraser Lake around 5 in the evening. I set up my tent near the shore. He set up his tent about 50 yards away, giving us both some privacy. I watched him pull gear from his pack, stake down his tent, arrange his sleeping bag inside. All completely solid and normal. I took a photo of the lake. His tent wasn't in the frame, even though I'd deliberately aimed to include it. My photo showed the shoreline where his tent stood, but just empty ground. No tent, no gear, no sign anyone else was camping there. That night, we made a campfire together, shared dinner, roasted marshmallows, watched stars emerge in the darkening sky. He seemed so real. I could hear him breathing, see the firelight reflecting in his eyes, smell the slight sweat and pine scent of someone who'd hiked 12 miles. When he handed me a stick for marshmallows, I felt his fingers brush mine, warm and solid. But when I subtly took a photo of our campfire, trying to capture the scene, the image showed me sitting alone, roasting a marshmallow by myself, looking slightly to the side as if in conversation with empty air. "Early start tomorrow?" he asked. "Yeah, I want to get back before it gets too hot." "Same. It's been great hiking with you, Devin. We should exchange contact info. Stay in touch." The way he said my name sent ice down my spine. I'd introduced myself at the beginning, sure, but there was something possessive in how he said it now, like he was trying on my identity, seeing how it fit. "Definitely," I said, forcing normalcy into my voice. "Let's do that in the morning." I retreated to my tent, zipped it shut, and lay in my sleeping bag with my phone gripped in one hand. I scrolled through the day's photos, over 20 shots taken throughout the hike. In every single one, I was alone, talking to myself, gesturing to nothing, sitting by a solo campfire. I barely slept. Every sound outside the tent made me freeze, footsteps circling, or just normal forest noises. At one point, I heard his voice humming tunelessly. I peeked out through a gap in the tent zipper. His campfire was still going, and I could see his silhouette moving around it. Real, present, impossible. Dawn came eventually. I packed up quickly, hands shaking. He emerged from his tent looking refreshed, cheerful, ready to head back. "Actually, I think I'm going to stay another day," I lied. "Maybe hike to the upper lake." "Oh, well, maybe I'll stay too." No, you should get back to your wife. She's probably worried. But thanks for the company yesterday. It was memorable." "When do you know it's time to run instead of seeking answers?" He looked disappointed, but nodded. "You're right. It was great meeting you, Devin. Safe travels." He started hiking down the trail. I watched until he disappeared around a bend. Then I frantically broke down my tent, stuffed everything in my pack, and practically ran in the opposite direction, taking a different trail that would loop back to the parking area. I hiked 8 miles in record time, driven by pure fear. When I finally reached the trailhead, my car was the only vehicle in the parking lot. There was no sign of his car, no sign there'd ever been another car. I checked the ground around where he would have parked. No tire tracks, no footprints. The dust was undisturbed except for my own tracks from 2 days ago. I got in my car and drove straight to the motel where I'd been staying in Ukiah. Locked the door, closed the curtains, tried to calm down. I told myself I'd experienced some kind of stress-induced hallucination, burnout manifesting as an imaginary hiking companion. It was psychologically explicable, almost comforting in its wrongness. Better to be losing my mind than to accept the alternative. Then I noticed the photos. New photos on my phone, time-stamped from last night. Photos I didn't take. Images of my tent from outside, looking in through the mesh window, me sleeping, curled in my bag, unaware. Dozens of them, taken from different angles throughout the night. Someone circling my tent, photographing me while I slept, getting closer and closer with each shot. The last photo was taken from maybe 6 inches away from the tent wall, close enough that I could see the fabric straining slightly inward, as if pressed by a face leaning close. In the image, I was deeply asleep, completely vulnerable, and in the reflection on my phone screen, I'd been holding it while I slept apparently. There was a face. Not quite mine, but close. Same general features, but arranged slightly wrong, like someone had studied my face and was learning to replicate it. I checked my camera roll more carefully. Mixed in with the photos I'd taken during the hike were others. Photos of me from behind, taken from a distance. Photos of my car in various parking lots over the past 3 weeks. Photos of me through windows of restaurants where I'd eaten. My motel room door, from the outside. Someone had been following me, documenting me for weeks, and I'd never noticed. The photos from last night were the most recent, but there was one more I'd missed. Time-stamped from this morning, just an hour ago. A selfie, not taken by me. It showed my face, or something wearing my face, standing exactly where I'd been standing when I told him I was staying another day. The expression was slightly off, the smile not quite reaching the eyes properly. A copy, still learning. And in the background of that photo, barely visible on the trail, was me. The real me. Hiking away, unaware I was being photographed. Unaware something was practicing being me. I left Oregon that day. Drove straight back to Seattle, sabbatical over. I returned to my job, to 70-hour weeks, to stress and burnout, and everything I'd been trying to escape. Because the wilderness wasn't empty like I'd thought. And some kinds of loneliness are worse than burnout. But sometimes I still get photos on my phone that I didn't take. Me at my desk, photographed through my apartment window. Me grocery shopping, taken from the next aisle over. Me sleeping, shot from the foot of my bed. Always the same slightly wrong angle, the same sense of something studying me, learning me, getting better at being me with each passing day. And I know that somewhere out there, maybe still hiking trails in Oregon, maybe closer than I want to think about, there's something that looks like me. Something that spent hours learning my mannerisms, my speech patterns, my memories. Something that wasn't in the photos, because cameras can't capture what doesn't exist in the normal way. It's still practicing, still learning, and someday, when it's perfect, when it can replicate me flawlessly, I think it's going to come back. I think it's going to finish what it started on that trail, and I don't know if anyone will be able to tell the difference. My name is Vanessa, and I'm 38 years old. For the past 6 years, I've volunteered with the Oregon Historical Society, documenting abandoned buildings and preserving stories before they disappear completely. It's work that feeds my soul, walking through places time forgot, imagining the lives lived within those walls, photographing decay and beauty intertwined. I've explored ghost towns across the state, always respectful, always careful. I thought I understood the weight of history, the way the past can linger in empty spaces. But Lone Rock taught me that some places don't just remember the past. Some places trap it, repeat it, demand that it continue. And sometimes you become part of that repetition whether you want to or not. Lone Rock sits in the high desert of eastern Oregon, population 21 at last count. It's barely a town anymore, just a handful of residents scattered among buildings that vastly outnumber the living. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of what used to be the main street, a white clapboard structure with tall windows and a bell tower. It had been abandoned since 1952, and I'd come to document it before winter weather caused further deterioration. The local historical records mentioned the school in passing. Closed following tragic incident June 1952. No details, no explanation. I'd asked the few locals I could find, but they were evasive. An elderly woman running the only store that still operated told me not to go near the school, especially not in the afternoon. When I pressed for why, she just shook her head. Some places are better left alone. That school doesn't want to stay closed. Naturally, that made me more determined to document it. I'm a researcher. Mystery and vague warnings are invitations, not deterrents. I assured her I'd be respectful, and I drove out to the schoolhouse on a clear September afternoon, camera equipment and notebook in hand. The building was beautiful in its abandonment. Peeling paint revealed layers of previous colors, white over cream over pale blue. Windows were surprisingly intact, glass wavy with age but unbroken. The front door hung slightly ajar, hinges rusted but still functional. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior took my breath away. Most abandoned buildings are gutted, vandalized, stripped of anything valuable. This one looked like the students and teacher had simply walked out one day and never returned. Desks in neat rows, all facing a chalkboard at the front, books still on shelves, a globe in the corner, countries labeled with names that no longer existed, papers scattered on the teacher's desk, a calendar on the wall, frozen on June 1952. I started photographing immediately, capturing the eerie preservation. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes floating in the still air. It was 2:45 p.m. according to my watch. I had maybe 2 hours of good light left. I was photographing the chalkboard, still showing a partially erased math lesson, when the bell rang. The sound was deafening in the small space, a deep metallic clang that vibrated through the floorboards. I jumped, heart racing, and looked up at the ceiling. The bell rope hung down from a hole leading to the tower above, but it wasn't moving. The bell rang 3 times, then stopped. Silence returned, but different now. Heavier. Expectant. I checked my watch. 3:15 p.m. School dismissal time in the old days. Except the bell had rung for no reason. There was no mechanism, no automated system. The rope hung completely still. I approached it cautiously and examined it. Covered in dust, undisturbed. No one had pulled it. Nothing had triggered it. Yet I'd heard it clearly, felt it even, the vibration in my bones. I told myself it was an old building settling, some quirk of temperature change, causing metal to expand and produce sound. But I knew what a bell sounded like. That had been deliberate, purposeful ringing. Then I heard the voices. Children's voices, muffled and distant, as if coming from far away or through a thick barrier. I couldn't make out words, just the general murmur of many young voices talking at once. The hair on my arm stood up. I was alone in the building. I checked the other 2 rooms before entering the classroom. No one else was here. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded wrong in the space, too loud and too small at the same time. The children's voices stopped. Absolute silence for 3 heartbeats. Then, in unison, they responded, "Good afternoon, teacher." My camera fell from my hands and clattered on the wooden floor. The voices came from everywhere and nowhere, from the empty desks, from the walls, from the air itself. Children's voices, probably 20 or more, speaking in perfect synchronization. "I'm not a teacher," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just here to take photographs." Can fear override the logical mind, or does logic abandon you when rules stop applying? A sound like rustling paper and shifting bodies filled the room. The desks. I swear this is true. The desks looked occupied now, not visually. I could still see they were empty, but the space around them felt full. Presence without form. The air was denser where students should be sitting. "Teacher must stay," the voices said, still in unison. "School day isn't over. Teacher must stay until dismissal." "The bell already rang," I pointed out, edging toward the door. "That was dismissal." "That was late bell. 3:15 is late bell for teacher. Dismissal is 4 o'clock. Teacher must stay." I reached the door and grabbed the handle. It wouldn't turn. I yanked harder, put my full weight into it. The door was locked, or jammed, or somehow sealed shut. Through the window in the door, I could see my car parked outside, Freedom, just yards away. But the door wouldn't budge. I ran to the windows. They'd been openable at one time. I could see the latches, but they were painted shut, or swollen with age, and despite my desperate pulling, none of them would open. I was trapped in a one-room schoolhouse with invisible children who thought I was their teacher. "Please," I said, turning back to the empty but occupied classroom. "I need to leave. I'm not really a teacher." "Teacher must teach the lesson." The voices were firmer now, taking on an edge. "Teacher must teach the lesson or school day never ends." Movement at the chalkboard caught my eye. Chalk was rising from the tray, floating in midair, writing on the board. I watched, paralyzed, as neat handwriting appeared. Attendance, June 6, 1952. 23. Students' present names began listing below, first and last names of children I didn't know. The chalk moved methodically, creating perfect letters. I counted as they appeared. 23 names, as promised. The last one finished, and the chalk dropped back into the tray with a click that sounded impossibly loud. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and searched for Lone Rock School 1952. The connection was weak, but a result loaded. A historical society page, different from my organization. One brief paragraph. Lone Rock School closed June 6, 1952, following a tragedy. All 23 students and their teacher perished when contaminated water from a nearby mining operation poisoned the school's well. The incident was covered up by the mining company. Bodies were buried in unmarked graves. The school was never reopened. June 6, 1952. The date on the calendar. The date on the chalkboard attendance. These children had died here, in this room, and somehow they'd never left. They'd been waiting 73 years for their teacher to finish the lesson, for the school day to end properly, for someone to dismiss them. "Okay," I said aloud, voice cracking. "Okay, I'll teach the lesson. But then you have to let me leave." A feeling of approval washed over me, almost tangible. The invisible students settled in their desks. I could hear the creak of wood, the rustle of clothing, the soft breathing of children waiting attentively. But I saw nothing, just empty desks in afternoon light. I walked on trembling legs to the teacher's desk and sat down. There was a lesson plan in the top drawer, dated June 6, 1952. The handwriting was neat, feminine, organized. The previous teacher's plan never completed. It was for a history lesson about Oregon Trail pioneers. Appropriate, maybe even deliberately ironic. Children who'd been poisoned, learning about pioneers who died seeking a better life. I stood at the front of the class and began teaching. I read from the textbook I found, a history book published in 1948. I wrote key points on the chalkboard, my handwriting appearing next to the attendance list. I asked questions and waited for answers, and they answered. The invisible students responded, hands raising in spaces I couldn't see, voices coming from empty air. They knew the material. They'd been ready for this lesson 73 years ago, and they still remembered. A girl in the front row, I couldn't see her, but I knew she was there, had particularly insightful comments about the hardships pioneers faced. A boy in the back made a joke about covered wagons, and other students laughed, the sound of children's laughter echoing in an empty room. I taught for 45 minutes, following the lesson plan exactly. Every activity, every discussion question, every homework assignment listed at the bottom. My watch crept toward 4 p.m., and I prayed that would be enough, that they'd let me finish, let me leave. At 3:58, I assigned the homework. Write 1 page about what you learned today. The invisible students groaned good-naturedly, the universal sound of children given homework. Despite everything, I almost smiled. At 4 hours exactly, the bell rang again, 3 times, clear and purposeful. "Class dismissed," I said, the words every teacher says, the words these children had been waiting to hear for 73 years. "Good work today, everyone. You're all excellent students." "Thank you, teacher," they chorused. and I felt them leave. Not saw, felt. The density in the air dissipated. The presence that had filled the empty desks vanished. The room became truly empty for the first time since I'd entered it. The door handle turned easily now. I grabbed my camera from where I dropped it and ran. I didn't look back. I got in my car and drove 5 miles before I had to pull over, shaking too hard to continue safely. I should have stayed away, should have called it done, added it to my files as an unexplained experience, but I'm a researcher. I needed documentation, evidence, some kind of proof. The next day, I drove back to Lone Rock in full daylight, camera ready. The schoolhouse stood quiet in the morning sun. I approached cautiously, opened the door. It swung freely now, and stepped inside. The chalkboard had been erased, except for one message in that same neat handwriting. "Thank you for teaching the lesson. You are a good teacher. We finally got to go home." And below that, in 23 different children's handwriting styles, childish and earnest, "Thank you, teacher." As I stood there, camera hanging forgotten at my side, I heard it. Distant and fading, like an echo from very far away. Children's laughter. Not trapped, or desperate, or demanding. Just children playing, the sound of recess, the sound of freedom. It grew fainter as I listened, moving away until it disappeared completely into silence. The calendar still showed June 1952. The desks still stood in their neat rows, but something fundamental had changed. The building felt empty now, in a way it hadn't before. Not abandoned, released. The past had finally been allowed to finish. The school day that had lasted 73 years had ended at last. I took my photographs, documented everything, and added the schoolhouse to the historical registry as a site of significance. But I didn't include the full story in my report. Some experiences aren't meant to be explained, only witnessed. Some histories don't need to be preserved because they're already there, waiting for someone to help them reach their ending. I still volunteer with the Historical Society, still document abandoned buildings, but now I'm more careful, more aware that some places aren't just empty spaces where life used to happen. Some places are still full, still active, still waiting for someone to help them finish what was interrupted. And if you're unlucky, or maybe lucky, enough to arrive at exactly the right time, you might find yourself part of history whether you plan to be or not. The lesson I learned in Lone Rock wasn't about Oregon Trail pioneers. It was about unfinished business, about how tragedy can trap moments in time, repeating them until someone finally helps them reach their natural conclusion. 23 children waited 73 years for a teacher to dismiss them properly, to let them go home. I'm glad I could give them that, even if it terrified me. Even if I still sometimes wake up hearing invisible students saying, "Good afternoon, teacher," and wonder what other unfinished lessons might be waiting in abandoned buildings across this state. My name is Isaiah, and I'm a documentary filmmaker. At 29, I've made 3 short documentaries about forgotten disasters in American history, events that killed dozens or hundreds of people but have faded from collective memory. I believe these stories deserve to be told, that the dead deserve to be remembered. That was my mission when I came to Heppner, Oregon, to document the 1903 flood that killed 247 people in a matter of hours. I wanted to give voice to the voiceless, to make the past feel present and real. I succeeded beyond anything I could have imagined. The past became so present, so real, that I can't escape it now. And I've learned that some people don't need you to remember them. They've never stopped existing in the first place. The Heppner flood happened on June 14th, 1903. A cloudburst in the mountains sent a wall of water down Willow Creek, straight through the center of town. Buildings were swept away, families drowned, bodies were found miles downstream. It was one of the deadliest flash floods in American history, and most people have never heard of it. That's exactly the kind of story I wanted to tell. I arrived in Heppner in late August, planning to spend 2 weeks conducting interviews, gathering historical records, filming locations. The local historical society was incredibly helpful, providing access to archives, photos, survivor accounts written in the immediate aftermath. I spent 3 days reading those accounts, feeling the horror of that night viscerally. Then I started seeking out descendants of survivors to interview. That's when I met Clara. She approached me outside the Historical Society on my 4th day in town. Elderly woman, maybe late 80s, wearing clothes that seemed slightly old-fashioned, but not unusually so for someone her age. She had sharp blue eyes and a direct manner. "You're the filmmaker," she said. "Not a question. You're making a documentary about the flood." "That's right. I'm Isaiah." "Are you related to someone who was there?" "I was there," she said simply. "I survived it. I'd like to tell you my story, if you're interested." I was stunned. The flood happened 122 years ago. For her to have been there, even as a small child, she'd have to be impossibly old. But maybe she'd misunderstood, was confused, meant her grandmother had been there. Elderly people sometimes conflate their own memories with stories they've heard. "I'd love to hear about it," I said gently. "Would you like to do a recorded interview?" "That's why I'm here." We went to my hotel room, where I had my equipment set up. I positioned her in a chair with good natural light, clipped a lavalier mic to her collar, and started recording. I began with softball questions. Her name, where she lived, how she'd heard about my project. "My name is Clara," she said, looking directly into the camera with those sharp blue eyes. "I'm 19 years old, and on June 14th, 1903, I nearly drowned in Willow Creek." I almost stopped the recording. This woman was clearly elderly, not 19, but something in her tone, her certainty made me continue. Maybe this was how she needed to tell the story, in present tense, identifying with her younger self. It would make powerful footage. "Tell me about that day," I prompted. What she described next was extraordinary. Not the general outline of the disaster that I'd read in historical accounts, but specific, intimate details. The smell of rain coming, how the air felt electric and wrong. The sound of the water arriving, not like a river, she said, but like a train, like thunder made liquid. She described her mother's blue dress, how it had dragged her down when the water hit. Described a man trying to climb onto a floating roof, only to have it roll and trap him underneath. Described the taste of mud and the feeling of her lungs burning. She spoke for 40 minutes without pause, without notes, with a level of detail that seemed impossible for someone recounting a story told to them. She knew the names of people who died, where each body had been found, what the town looked like in the immediate aftermath. She described the grief, the mass funeral, the way survivors looked at each other differently afterward. "We all died a little that night," she said, staring into the camera. "Even those of us who lived. We became ghosts walking around in a world that had moved on without us." After the interview, I thanked her profusely. She gave me a strange look, sad and knowing. "You're going to remember us, aren't you? You're going to make sure people know what happened?" "That's exactly what I'm doing," I assured her. "Good. We've waited so long to be remembered properly." She left, and I immediately began reviewing the footage. It was stunning. The best interview I'd ever captured. Her details, her emotion, her presence on camera. It would be the centerpiece of the documentary. I started cross-referencing her account with historical records to fact-check. Everything matched. Every name she'd mentioned, every location, every detail about the weather and the water and the aftermath. It all corresponded perfectly with contemporary accounts. Too perfectly. She'd mentioned a girl named Sarah who'd grabbed onto a fence post and held on for 2 hours until rescuers reached her. Historical records mentioned Sarah by name, including that exact detail about the fence post. She'd described a man named Thomas who'd survived by climbing into a tree, only to die of exposure before morning. The Historical Society had his obituary, confirming that exact scenario. How does someone know details that were only recorded in documents she couldn't possibly have accessed? I searched for Clara in local records, found several Claras who died in the flood. One caught my attention. Clara Whitmore, age 19, body recovered 3 days after the flood 2 miles downstream. There was even a photo in the historical archives, a formal portrait, probably taken within the year before she died. The woman in the 1903 photograph looked exactly like the woman I'd interviewed. Not similar, identical. Same facial structure, same sharp blue eyes, same direct expression. I told myself it was a descendant, a great-great-granddaughter who happened to look remarkably like her ancestor. Coincidence, genetics. But she'd said, "I'm 19 years old." Present tense. I went back through my footage from the past few days, B-roll I'd shot around town, interviews with historical society staff, and there she was, in the background of multiple shots, standing across the street watching me film, sitting on a bench in the park while I interviewed someone else, always at a distance, always in period-appropriate but not overtly costume-like clothing, always watching. I hadn't noticed her at the time, but reviewing the footage she appeared in at least a dozen shots over 3 days, always just at the edge of frame, always observing. My phone rang that night. Unknown number. I answered. Isaiah. Clara's voice. "I need to tell you the rest. There's more to the story. Can we meet tomorrow?" Clara. "How did you get this number?" "Tomorrow. Same place. I need you to understand what really happened, please." She hung up before I could respond. I tried calling back. The number was disconnected. The next morning, she was waiting outside my hotel. In daylight, I could see details I'd missed during the interview. Her clothes weren't just old-fashioned. They were authentically from the 1900s. The fabric, the stitching, the style, everything was period accurate in a way that went beyond vintage clothing. And she cast a shadow that seemed too faint, like she wasn't quite solid enough to block the sun properly. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "I didn't tell you everything yesterday. I was afraid you'd stop listening." We walked to a park by Willow Creek. I had my camera, started filming handheld as we walked. She told me more about the moments before she died, how the water had filled her lungs, how everything had gone dark, how she'd woken up on the creek bank 3 days later, confused, seeking her family, how no one would look at her, no one would respond when she called out, how she'd watched her own funeral from the back of the crowd. "I didn't understand at first," she said. "Took me years to realize I'd died. By then, everyone I knew was gone. But I couldn't leave. The town held me. The memory of that night held me. I've been here for 122 years, waiting for someone who could see me, who could hear the full story. I stood there with my camera, watching this woman, this ghost, this impossible thing, tell me about being dead for over a century. And the terrifying part was that I believed her. Every instinct said she was telling the truth. "Why can I see you?" I asked. "Because you're looking for us. You're trying to remember us. That makes you permeable, open to those of us who refuse to be forgotten." Over the next week, she appeared constantly. In my hotel room at night, sitting in the chair by the window, walking beside me on the street, visible only to me, people walked right through her without noticing, calling my phone at odd hours to tell me more details, more stories, names of others who died that she wanted me to remember. I tried showing her to other people, pointed her out to the Historical Society director. Right there, sitting on that bench. The director looked where I pointed and saw nothing. Showed people my footage. Clara was clearly visible to me in the recordings, but everyone else saw empty space. When I insisted there was a woman in the frame, people started looking at me with concern. My producer called. "How's the footage looking?" "Incredible. I got an interview with someone who was actually there." "What?" "Isaiah, that's impossible. The flood was 1903. Everyone who experienced it is dead. I know what I filmed. You'll see when I send you the footage. But when I tried to export the interview files, they corrupted, every single one. Video files became unreadable, audio tracks filled with static. Hours of footage with Clara, all corrupted except for brief glimpses, fragments where her voice came through, or her face appeared for a frame before dissolving into digital artifacts. The only interview footage that remained intact was from other sources. Descendants, historians, local residents. Everything with Clara was destroyed. She appeared in my hotel room that night, and for the first time she looked distressed, transparent. I could see through her to the wall behind. "I'm fading," she said. "You remembered us. You did what we needed. Now I can finally let go." "Wait, no, let me try to record this again." "It won't work. It never works. The only way we exist is in memory, in oral tradition, in people speaking our names. You heard me. You listened. That's enough. Can a ghost be grateful? Can something that shouldn't exist feel relief?" "Thank you for remembering," she whispered. And then she was gone. Not dramatically, just a gradual fade until I was staring at an empty room, wondering if any of it had been real. I stayed in Heppner another week, trying to salvage the documentary. Used the historical records, the interviews I could save, the location footage. Made a decent film about the 1903 flood. It premiered at a small film festival, got positive reviews, exactly the kind of success I'd hoped for. But I kept checking that corrupted footage, trying to recover something, anything. Last week, my editing software managed to extract one single frame from one of the corrupted files. Just one clear image. It's a photograph from 1903, part of the historical archive I'd digitized for reference. Shows the aftermath of the flood, destroyed buildings, survivors standing in the mud. I remember scanning this photo, using it in my documentary, but in the recovered frame, there's something that wasn't in the original archive photo. In the background, barely visible, standing among the survivors, is me. Wearing the same clothes I wore during that first interview with Clara, holding what looks like a modern camera, standing in a photograph taken 122 years before I was born. I don't know what it means. I don't know if I somehow existed in her memory so vividly that I became part of the historical record she experienced, or if, by remembering her so completely, I inserted myself backwards into her timeline. I don't know if any of it was real or if I experienced some kind of elaborate breakdown while researching trauma. But sometimes, late at night, my phone rings. Unknown number. I answer, and I hear Clara's voice, faint and distant, telling me more stories. More names of people who died that night, people I've verified existed but whose names aren't in any historical record I've found. She's still there, somewhere between memory and existence, still insisting on being remembered. And I keep adding names to my research files. Keep documenting people who died 122 years ago, whose stories were never recorded, whose existences I have no way of verifying except that a ghost told me about them. I'm making a second documentary now, one I'll never be able to prove is true, one that consists entirely of me recounting stories a dead woman told me, stories that exist only because I refuse to let them be forgotten. Maybe that's all history really is. Maybe we're all just ghosts telling stories to anyone willing to listen, hoping someone will remember us when we're gone. And maybe some of us never really leave. We just wait decades or centuries for someone permeable enough to see us, someone who cares enough to keep our names alive. Clara is still waiting by Willow Creek. I can feel her there, even from hundreds of miles away. And someday, when I'm ready, I'll go back. I'll film one more interview that won't record properly, have one more conversation that no one else will hear. Because someone has to remember. Someone has to bear witness, even if it means becoming part of a past you never lived, captured in photographs taken before you were born, haunted by voices that refuse to stay silent just because they're dead. My name is Liam, and I'm 56 years old. I've worked the night shift at the spray gas and convenience for 11 years now, midnight to 8 a.m. 5 nights a week, in a town with a population that barely breaks 160. It's the kind of job that wears you down slowly. The loneliness and fluorescent lights and endless identical nights blurring together until you can't remember what day it is or how long you've been standing behind this counter. I'm used to the monotony. I'm used to the isolation. I thought I was used to everything the night shift could throw at me. But time doesn't work the way I thought it did. And some customers aren't visiting once. They're visiting forever, trapped in a loop they can't escape, dragging you into their repetition until you can't tell what's real anymore. The customers started coming in about 2 weeks ago, always at 2:47 a.m., like clockwork. I'd be restocking cigarettes or reading a book during the dead hours, and the door chime would ring. Same man every time, maybe 45 years old, average build, wearing a jacket even though it was summer. He'd nod at me, friendly but tired, walk to the refrigerated section, grab a Red Bull and a package of beef jerky, come to the counter. "How's your night going?" he'd ask. "Slow. Yours?" "Long drive. Need the caffeine." Same conversation, word for word, every night. I rang him up, always $8.47 with tax. He'd pay with a $10 bill, tell me to keep the change and leave. The whole interaction took maybe 3 minutes. Then I'd go back to my book or my restocking, and the night would continue its slow crawl toward dawn. After the first week, I started looking forward to it. A regular customer, someone to break up the monotony. We never talked about anything substantial, but there was a comfort in the routine. At 2:47, he'd arrive. Small talk, same order, same payment. Then gone until the next night. But small details started bothering me. His jacket, heavy, lined, the kind you wear in winter. We were in the middle of August, temperatures hitting 90 during the day, cooling to maybe 60 at night. Not jacket weather, I mentioned it once. "Warm night for that jacket," I said as I bagged his items. He looked down at it like he'd forgotten he was wearing it. "Is it?" "Feels cold to me." After he left, I stepped outside to check. 63 degrees, slightly humid, not cold at all. The next night, same jacket, and the night after that. I started paying more attention. His clothes never changed. Exact same outfit every single night. Jeans, gray t-shirt, that heavy jacket. Same slight shadow of stubble on his face, like he hadn't shaved in 2 days. Never more, never less. Same tired eyes. On the 10th night, I asked, "You traveling through?" "Haven't seen you around during the day." "Just passing through," he said, same friendly tone. "Long drive. Need the caffeine." Wait. That wasn't the right response. I'd asked about him being in town, and he'd given me the answer he always gave when I asked how his night was going. Like he was reading from a script and had skipped to the wrong line. When does repetition stop being coincidence and start being something wrong? The incident that made me check the security footage had nothing to do with him. Someone had reported a theft from our ATM, and my manager asked me to review the overnight recordings from the past 2 weeks. I pulled up the footage and started scanning through, looking for suspicious activity near the ATM. That's when I saw him, the regular customer, coming in at 2:47 a.m., just like always. I watched him go through his routine, refrigerator, grab items, come to counter, pay, leave, normal. I fast-forwarded. At 3:02 a.m., he came in again. Same routine, exact same items, same interaction with me. I could see myself on the footage, ringing him up, having the same conversation. I rewound and watched carefully. At 2:47, he entered. At 2:50, he left. At 3:02, he entered again. At 3:05, he left. At 3:17, he entered again. I checked the timestamp on my interaction memory. I remembered him coming in once that night at 2:47, but the footage showed him coming in every 15 minutes, over and over throughout my entire shift. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the footage. Every 15 minutes, like a metronome. 247, 302, 317, 332, 347, 402, on and on until my shift ended at 8 a.m. 24 visits in one night, and in each one I interacted with him exactly the same way, like I was meeting him for the first time every 15 minutes. But I only remembered one visit. I checked the previous nights. Same pattern. Every 15 minutes, every night for 2 weeks. Hundreds of visits. Hundreds of identical interactions. And I remembered only one per night, always at 2:47 a.m. I went back further in the footage before he'd started coming in. Found the date 2 weeks ago, the night before his first visit. Watched my overnight shift. Normal. Boring. No customers at all between 2 and 5 a.m. Then I found it. At 2:47 a.m. exactly, the timestamp on the video flickered, jumped. When it stabilized, something was different about the store. The lighting was slightly dimmer. And 5 seconds later, he walked in for the first time. I checked my shift logs. The night he first appeared, I'd clocked in at midnight and clocked out at 8 a.m. 8 hours, like always. But when I added up the actual footage, accounting for all his visits, all the time that should have passed, the night had lasted 47 hours, compressed somehow into 8 hours of my experience time. Time was wrong, folding in on itself, looping, repeating, and I was caught in it, experiencing the same 15-minute interaction over and over while my conscious memory only retained one version. I started watching him more carefully during his visits. The next night, at 2:47, he came in. I was ready this time, paying attention to every detail. He went to the refrigerator, grabbed his items, came to the counter. "How's your night going?" he asked. "Same as always," I said. "You. Long drive. Need the caffeine." I rang him up. He paid. He left. I wrote down the time, 2:50 a.m. Then I stayed alert, watching the clock, refusing to let my attention drift. At 3:02, the door chimed. He walked in. Same jacket, same tired eyes. Went to the refrigerator, grabbed the exact same items, came to the counter. "How's your night going?" he asked. My blood went cold. I'd just seen him 15 minutes ago, but he was acting like it was his first visit of the night. And the horrible thing was, I felt it too. That sense of first encounter, like I hadn't seen him before. My memory of the 2:47 visit was already fading, becoming dreamlike. You were just here," I managed to say. He looked confused. "First time tonight. Just needed to stop for caffeine." "No, you were here at 2:47, 15 minutes ago." He glanced at the clock. "It's 3:02. I just got here." I rang him up with shaking hands. He paid, left. I immediately wrote it down. Second visit, 3:02, 3:05. Exact same interaction. How many times can you meet the same person before you realize you're trapped in their repetition? At 3:17, he came in again. This time, I was watching the door. There was no transition, no moment of him approaching from outside. The door chimed, and he was just there, already inside, already walking toward the refrigerator. Like the previous 15 minutes had been erased, and we were resetting to the same starting point. "Stop," I said loudly. "Don't go to the refrigerator. We've done this twice already tonight." He paused, looking genuinely confused and slightly concerned. "Are you all right?" "What's your name?" I demanded. "I'm just trying to buy some items and get back on the road." "Your name. Tell me your name." He stared at me for a long moment. Then quietly, "I don't remember." That's when I saw it. The flicker. For just a moment, he looked different. Older, maybe 65, face more lined, hair grayer. Then he was back to 45 again. Another flicker. Younger, maybe 30, smoother face, darker hair. Then back. Then elderly. Then young. Ages cascading across his face like he was living his entire life, in fast forward and rewind simultaneously. "What's happening to me?" he whispered. "Why do I keep coming back here?" "When did you die?" I asked, suddenly certain. His face went blank. "Die? You died here, didn't you? In this parking lot? At 2:47 a.m. Recognition flickered in his eyes. I was driving, so tired, pulled in to get coffee, sat in my car for a minute, just closed my eyes for a second, just 1 second. His voice was rising, panicked. Why won't it end? Why do I keep trying to buy coffee? Why can't I leave? He aged as he spoke, getting older with each word. 45 to 50 to 60 to 70. His hair went white, his face collapsed into wrinkles, his posture stooped. Then he reversed, getting younger, returning to 45. Every night, he said, every 15 minutes. I wake up in my car, feel that need for caffeine, come inside, talk to you, leave. And then I'm back in my car, and it starts again. How long has it been? I checked my notes. 2 weeks since you started appearing to me, but I pulled up the security footage on my phone, showed him. You've been coming in every 15 minutes, hundreds of times. How long? He repeated. How long in real time? I didn't want to tell him, but his desperate eyes demanded honesty. I pulled up old footage, scrolling back, looking for when this started. Found it eventually. Had to dig deep into the archived files. 6 years, I said quietly. This pattern started 6 years ago. You've been looping every 15 minutes for 6 years. That's over 200,000 visits. He stared at me, aging and de-aging, flickering through his entire life cycle. I died 6 years ago. Heart attack, probably. Fell asleep in my car and never woke up. And I've been trying to buy Red Bull and beef jerky 200,000 times since then. Why can I see it now? Why am I aware of it? Maybe I'm finally strong enough to be seen. Maybe you're finally tired enough to notice. Maybe time is breaking down completely, and we're both caught in it. At 3:32, he came in again, but this time the previous version of him was still standing at my counter. 2 of him now, both aging and de-aging independently. The new one walked to the refrigerator while the old one watched himself with horror. It's getting worse, he said. The loop is tightening. At 3:47, another one appeared. 3 of him now. At 4:02, 4. They were stacking, accumulating, the 15-minute resets happening, but not erasing the previous versions anymore. My tiny gas station filled with copies of the same dead man, all buying the same items, all at different ages, all trapped in their final routine. I don't remember the rest of that night clearly. At some point, the sun came up, and they all vanished. My shift ended. I clocked out, drove home, slept badly. The next night, I came back to work. At 2:47, I watched the parking lot. Waited. The door didn't chime. He didn't appear. I checked the security footage. No visits all night. The loop had stopped. I searched local obituaries. Took a while, but I found it. 6 years ago, almost to the day. Name withheld from the article, but the details matched. Man found deceased in vehicle at Spray Gas and Convenience. Apparent heart attack, discovered by morning shift employee. Time of death estimated at 2:47 a.m. For 6 years, he'd been stuck in those final moments, trying to stay awake, trying to get caffeine, trying to prevent what had already happened. And I'd been helping him, hundreds of times per night, caught in his loop without knowing it. The visits stopped, but I'm not the same. I check the clock obsessively now, making sure time is moving correctly. I write down every customer interaction, trying to make sure I'm not experiencing the same 15 minutes over and over. I'm terrified that one night I'll realize I've been serving the same customer for hours, resetting every few minutes, trapped in someone else's final moments. And sometimes, at 2:47 a.m., I still feel him about to arrive. The door doesn't chime, but I sense him in the parking lot, sitting in a car that isn't there anymore, fighting sleep, trying one more time to come inside for caffeine that won't save him. The loop might be broken, but the groove it wore into time is still there, still waiting. I'm putting in my notice next week. 11 years of night shifts is enough, but I wonder if leaving will matter. I wonder if I'm already stuck, already looping, experiencing the same shift over and over while thinking time is moving forward. Maybe I've been here for 6 years too, serving him 200,000 times. And this moment, this decision to quit, is just another part of the loop. Maybe we're all stuck in our final routines, and we just don't know it yet. My name is Zara, and I'm a land surveyor. At 41, I've been doing this work for 17 years, measuring property boundaries across Oregon with precision instruments and meticulous attention to detail. Mathematics doesn't lie. Measurements are objective. When you drive a stake into the ground and record its GPS coordinates, that location becomes fixed, certain, real. That's what I believed anyway. That reality could be measured, boundaries could be drawn, and the world would stay consistent between 2 points. But there's a property line outside Condon that refuses to be measured. Because on one side is the world we know, and on the other side is somewhere else. A place that looks like our world but isn't. A place where the past never ended, or the present never began, or time split into 2 versions that should never have existed simultaneously. The job seemed routine when I accepted it. 2 farmers with adjacent properties, both claiming ownership of a disputed 10-acre parcel. This happens constantly in rural areas, where original surveys were done a century ago with less precise tools. I'd come in with modern equipment, establish the correct boundary, and resolve the dispute. Easy work, good pay, done in a day. I arrived at the property on a clear September morning. Both farmers met me at the road, each pointing to different landmarks they claimed marked the boundary. I nodded, took notes, and started setting up my equipment. Total station on a tripod, GPS rover, measuring tape for verification. I'd create a survey accurate to within centimeters, and the dispute would be over. The first measurement was fine. I set a reference stake on the western edge of the disputed area, recorded the coordinates. Then I walked east, taking readings every 50 feet, creating a line of data points that would establish the boundary. At point 4, my GPS reading jumped. I was standing in an empty wheat field, but according to my GPS, I'd suddenly moved 200 feet north. I checked the equipment. Working fine. Took the reading again. Different coordinates now, showing me 150 feet south of the first reading. Same physical location, 3 completely different GPS coordinates. I switched to my laser distance measurer, shot a reading back to my reference stake. The distance showed 187 feet. I walked back carefully, counting my steps, estimating. Maybe 200 feet, confirming the laser reading. But when I walked the same route again, the laser showed 243 feet. The distance was changing. Professional frustration kicked in. Equipment malfunction, maybe. I set up a physical measuring tape, the old-fashioned way. Unspooled it from the reference stake to my position. It showed 198 feet. I left it in place and walked away, then returned. The tape now showed 224 feet, stretched between the same 2 points. The distance between 2 fixed points was changing. Can space itself become unreliable, or had I stepped somewhere that didn't follow normal geometry? I looked around more carefully. The wheat field on the western side of where I stood looked normal. Golden grain, slight breeze moving through it, normal autumn agriculture. But on the eastern side, past where I was standing, the landscape looked different. Not dramatically, but subtly wrong. The wheat was there, but it seemed faded, like a photograph that had been in sunlight too long. And beyond the field, I could see structures, buildings. Not the farmhouses and barns that should be there according to the property maps, but different buildings. Older architecture, more densely packed, like a small town. I pulled out my satellite imagery on my tablet. The eastern property should show empty fields, maybe one distant farmhouse. The satellite image confirmed that, just empty agricultural land for miles. But when I looked up, I could see buildings. Not ruins, not abandoned structures. Buildings that looked occupied, maintained, with intact roofs and painted walls. I walked toward the boundary where the landscape shifted. There was a specific line, maybe 2 feet wide, where the change happened. On one side, normal wheat field and modern landscape. On the other side, faded colors and impossible buildings. I could see both simultaneously. Reality split along this property line. I stepped across. The temperature dropped immediately, at least 15 degrees. The sunlight changed quality, becoming thinner, more gray. The sounds changed too. No distant highway noise, no airplane overhead that had been there moments before. Just silence and a weird hollow quality to the air, like being inside a large empty room. The buildings were closer now, only a quarter mile away. I could see them clearly. Two-story structures with 1960s architecture, old cars parked on streets, telephone poles with actual telephone wires instead of modern cables. It looked like a small town from 50 years ago, preserved perfectly. Except the newspaper stand I could see had a date visible, September 15th, 2025, today's date. But reporting news from 1967. I walked toward the town, surveying equipment forgotten. Every professional instinct said to document this, but my hands were shaking too much to hold the camera steady. The closer I got, the more details emerged. A gas station with prices showing 0.33 per gallon. A movie theater advertising films from 1967. A diner with a menu in the window listing prices that would have been current 60 years ago. But everything looked recently used. No dust, no decay, no abandonment. The gas station's lights were on. The diner had steam on its windows, like something was cooking inside. A car, a 1965 Chevrolet, immaculate condition, was parked at the curb with warm exhaust still hanging in the cold air. I approached the diner and looked through the window. Place settings on tables, coffee steaming in cups, but no people. I tried the door. It opened. A bell chimed, the old-fashioned kind that rings when you enter. Hello? My voice echoed wrong, like the space was larger than it should be. No response. I walked inside. The radio was playing, some news broadcast about Vietnam War escalation. The coffee was fresh. I could smell it, see the steam. A newspaper lay open on the counter. I picked it up. Condon Chronicle, September 15th, 2025, the header said. But the stories were from 1967. Troop deployments, political news from the Johnson administration, local stories about people who should be elderly or dead by now, written as if they were current events. When does reality become so fractured that you can't trust your own perception? A sound behind me made me spin around. People were entering the diner. 5 of them, dressed in 1960s clothing. Men in suits, women in dresses, with styles from that era. They looked normal, solid, real, but they moved in perfect synchronization, like one consciousness controlling multiple bodies. They sat at different tables simultaneously, reaching for menus at exactly the same instant. "Hello, Zara," they said in unison, all 5 voices speaking as one, perfect synchronization. "How do you know my name?" "We know everyone who crosses the line. We've been waiting for someone to cross. It's been so long since anyone came to visit." "What is this place?" They smiled, all 5 at once, the exact same smile on different faces. "This is Condon. Our Condon. It split off in 1967. An accident at the reservoir. Everyone died. But we didn't want to die, so we just continued. Here, in the space between what happened and what should have happened. You're all dead. We prefer to think of it as divergent. Your timeline went one way. Ours went another. We're still living our lives. September 15th, 1967, looping forever. But we're aware now. We know it's 2025 in your world. We know we're trapped. And we're so lonely, Zara. So lonely living the same day for 58 years. More people were appearing now, materializing in the diner, on the street outside, in the buildings. All moving in that same synchronized way. All speaking with the same unified voice, coming from dozens of mouths. "Stay with us, Zara. Be part of our town. We need new people. We need someone who remembers what it's like to have different days, different experiences. Stay and tell us stories. Stay forever. They stood as one, dozens of people moving in perfect unison, walking toward me. Their expressions were friendly, but that synchronization was horrifying. One mind, many bodies, all desperate for something I couldn't give them. I ran, burst out of the diner, sprinted back toward where I'd crossed the line. Behind me, I heard them following, not running, just walking in that synchronized way, dozens of footsteps hitting the ground at precisely the same instant, creating one loud, rhythmic thud. Don't leave, Zara. Don't leave us alone again. Stay in September 15th, 1967. Stay forever. I could see the boundary ahead, that thin line where reality shifted back to normal. I pushed myself harder, lungs burning. The synchronized footsteps were getting closer. I glanced back, hundreds of them now, the entire town, all walking in perfect unison, all wearing the same expression, all speaking my name with one voice. I crossed the boundary. Immediately, the temperature jumped back up. The sunlight returned to normal. The sounds of the modern world rushed back. Distant traffic, a plane overhead, wind through wheat. I spun around to look back. Nothing. Just empty wheat field. No town, no buildings, no synchronized people. Just normal agricultural land stretching to the horizon exactly as the satellite imagery showed. Like none of it had ever been there. I grabbed my equipment and ran back to my truck. Didn't pack it properly. Just threw everything in the back and drove away. Both farmers were calling after me, asking what happened, asking about the survey. I didn't stop. Back in my office, I pulled up every map I could find of that area. Historical records, old surveys, property documents from the 1960s. Found something in a 1967 newspaper archive. Brief mention of an incident at a reservoir near Condon. Toxic leak, several people hospitalized, quickly covered up by the county. The article said everyone recovered. But what if they hadn't? What if that whole area, that whole town, had died that day, and instead of accepting it, they'd split off into some parallel space where they could keep living, loop the same day forever, maintaining their town, waiting for someone to cross over and acknowledge they still existed? I never filed the survey report, told both farmers my equipment malfunctioned, refunded their deposits. I can't go back there, can't cross that line again, because I know what's waiting. Hundreds of people trapped in 1967, living the same September day for nearly 60 years, desperate for someone to stay with them, to break their loneliness. And the worst part? My GPS logs from that day show I was on the property for 45 minutes. But my watch, my phone, my truck's clock, they all show I was there for 4 days. Same time distortion I'd measured in the distance between points. Time itself breaks down at that boundary. I still do survey work, but I'm careful now. I check historical records before accepting jobs. Look for any mentions of accidents, incidents, places where something went wrong, because I know now that reality has boundaries we can't see, lines where our world touches others, where people who should have died keep living in spaces that shouldn't exist. That property line is still there. Still disputed, still unmeasured. And every September 15th, I wonder if they're still walking in unison, still calling my name, still waiting for someone to cross over and stay forever in their endless repeated day. These were 10 deeply disturbing stories from Oregon's small towns where reality bent in unimaginable ways. If these stories sent chills down your spine, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for Unspoken. Fears. Drop a comment telling me which story disturbed you the most and share your own unexplainable experiences. Until next time, stay safe and remember, some places don't want to be found.